What if the person you judged for their appearance was actually sacrificing everything to save someone you loved more than life itself? The morning sun caught the rust spots on Janet's 20-year-old Honda as she pulled into the hospital parking lot for another 12-hour shift. Her hands, roughened from years of caring for others, gripped the worn steering wheel as she whispered a quiet prayer. Inside her purse sat a collection of bills she couldn't afford to pay and a bank statement that made her stomach turn. But none of that mattered right now. Through the passenger window, she could see the children's wing where little patients fought battles bigger than themselves. Janet had been a pediatric nurse for 15 years, and she'd learned that sometimes love meant making impossible choices. Sometimes it meant driving a car held together by hope and determination. Sometimes it meant giving up everything for a child who wasn't even your own. Where are you watching from tonight? Janet Matthews had always believed that healing happened in the quiet moments between heartbeats. At 36, she'd spent half her life in hospital corridors, learning that children possessed a courage that humbled even the strongest adults. Her small apartment was filled with thank you cards from families whose children she'd helped nurse back to health, each one a reminder of why she'd chosen this calling over higher-paying careers. This particular Tuesday morning felt different, though. As she walked through the pediatric ward, Janet's thoughts kept drifting to room 314. 7-year-old Lucas had been fighting leukemia for 8 months, and his latest test results weren't promising. The experimental treatment his doctors recommended could save his life, but the cost was astronomical. Even with insurance, his family would need to find an additional $40,000. His father's been here every night this week, whispered Janet's colleague, Patricia, as they prepared medications. Barely sleeps, barely eats. You can see the stress eating him alive. Janet nodded, remembering the man she'd seen pacing the hallways at 3 in the morning. Richard Castellano was in his early 40s, always impeccably dressed despite the circumstances. She'd heard whispers about his business success, the luxury cars in the parking garage, the expensive suits that never seemed to wrinkle even after sleepless nights. But when she looked at him, all Janet saw was a father drowning in helplessness. The treatment center in Boston confirmed they have an opening, Patricia continued. But they need the money up front. Richard's been making calls all week, trying to liquidate assets, but apparently, most of his wealth is tied up in long-term investments. Janet's heart clenched. She'd seen this scenario too many times. Families forced to choose between financial ruin and their child's life. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. During her lunch break, Janet sat in her car and opened her laptop. Her savings account showed $8,000, money she'd been setting aside for her mother's nursing home care. Her investment portfolio, modest but carefully built over 10 years, totaled another $35,000. Together with the equity in her small home, she could raise just enough. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother's care facility about next month's payment. Janet stared at the message for a long moment, then made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First to her financial advisor, then to her bank, and finally to her real estate agent. By the time her shift ended, Janet had set in motion the sale of everything she owned. The process would take a few weeks to complete, but the cash advance on her life insurance policy would provide the immediate funds needed. She'd spoken with the billing department anonymously, arranging for a cashier's check to be delivered to Lucas's account by Friday. As she walked to her car that evening, Janet felt a strange mixture of terror and peace. Her Honda coughed to life on the 3rd try, and she patted the dashboard gently. They'd been through worse together. In 2 weeks, she'd probably be taking the bus to work, but Lucas would be on his way to Boston for treatment. Wednesday morning brought unseasonably cold weather, and Janet's Honda wheezed its protest in the parking garage. She'd been awake since 4, finalizing paperwork for the insurance loan and calculating how long her remaining savings would last. The anonymous donation was scheduled for Friday, but she'd noticed Richard looking more haggard each day. "Excuse me," a sharp voice cut through her thoughts as she locked her car. "You can't park there." Janet turned to see a man in an expensive charcoal suit striding toward her. It was Richard Castellano, but his usual composed demeanor had been replaced by barely contained frustration. "I'm sorry." Janet glanced at her parking spot, clearly marked for hospital staff. "That space is reserved for doctors," Richard snapped, his exhaustion evident in his clipped tone. "And frankly, that rust bucket is an eyesore in a place where people are fighting for their lives. Some of us are dealing with real problems." The words hit Janet like a physical blow. She looked at her car, the peeling paint, the dented bumper she couldn't afford to fix, the window that no longer rolled down properly. For a moment, shame flooded through her. "I understand you're upset," she said quietly, "but this is a staff parking area. I work here." Richard's laugh was bitter. "Work here? Doing what, exactly? Because whoever's paying you obviously isn't paying enough for decent transportation." Janet's cheeks burned, but something in his voice, the crack beneath the cruelty, made her pause. This wasn't really about parking spaces or old cars. This was about a man watching his son slip away and feeling powerless to stop it. "You're right," she said simply. "It's not much to look at, but it gets me where I need to go." As she walked toward the hospital entrance, Janet heard Richard call after her. "Next time, use the employee lot in the back. Some of us have enough problems without looking at that thing every morning." Inside the elevator, Janet's hands trembled as she pressed the button for the third floor. Through the glass doors, she could see Richard heading toward the children's wing, his shoulders heavy with a burden she understood better than he'd ever know. The morning shift was unusually quiet, giving Janet time to process what had happened. She'd been called worse things by stressed families before, but something about Richard's words lingered. Maybe it was because she'd already sacrificed so much for his son. Or B, it was because she recognized the desperate anger of a parent who couldn't save his child. During rounds, Janet watched Richard through Lucas's doorway. The tough businessman facade melted away as he read to his son, his voice gentle and full of love. This was the real man, not the one lashing out in parking garages, but the father who would give anything to take away his child's pain. If this moment of seeing love triumph over anger touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. As her shift ended, Janet made a decision. She pulled out her phone and called the billing department. "I need to move up the timeline for that anonymous donation to room 314, she said. "Can we make it happen tomorrow instead of Friday?" Sometimes love meant enduring insults. Sometimes it meant giving everything you had, even when the person you were saving would never know your name. Thursday morning arrived with news that made Janet's heart race. Lucas had developed complications during the night, a fever that indicated infection. The Boston Treatment Center would only hold his spot for another 48 hours. Janet found herself checking on room 314 more frequently than her other patients, though she was careful to stay out of sight when Richard was present. The man who'd insulted her car yesterday was now a hollow shell, pacing the hallways at all hours. She'd seen his type before, powerful people who discovered that money couldn't buy the one thing they needed most. "His mother lives in Italy," Patricia whispered during their afternoon break. "She's been trying to get here, but visa complications are keeping her away. He's handling this completely alone." Through the doorway, Janet watched Richard reading to Lucas, who was barely conscious but seemed comforted by his father's voice. The book was Charlotte's Web, the same story Janet's mother had read to her during her own hospital stay as a child. That evening, Richard's phone conversation echoed down the empty hallway. "I don't care what it takes," he was saying, his voice breaking. "Liquidate everything. The portfolio, the real estate holdings, all of it. My son is dying." Janet's breath caught. The desperation in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't about pride or maintaining appearances anymore. This was a father who'd reached the end of his resources and was staring into an abyss. 36 hours. Richard's voice cracked. "That's not enough time. The lawyer said it would take at least a week to access those accounts." Janet stepped closer to the nurse's station, her heart pounding. Through years of working with families in crisis, she'd learned to read the signs of a parent pushed beyond their breaking point. "Please." Richard was begging now. "All pretense gone. There has to be something else. I'll sign over everything I own." I'll declare bankruptcy if I have to." The conversation ended, and Janet heard the sound of Richard's phone hitting the wall. When she peered around the corner, she saw him collapsed in a chair outside Lucas's room, his head in his hands, sobbing with the raw grief of a man who'd run out of miracles. Without thinking, Janet found herself walking toward him. She stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to say. This was the same man who'd mocked her car, called her livelihood meaningless. But looking at him now, all she could see was a broken father. "Mr. Castellano," she said softly. He looked up, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Maybe shame. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I don't even know your name. And yesterday I was horrible to you. I'm not usually ... double quotes." He trailed off, unable to finish. "Janet," she said, "and we all say things we don't mean when we're scared. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where fear made you act in ways you later regretted? Let us know in the comments how you've dealt with those feelings. He's everything to me," Richard whispered, looking toward Lucas's room. "And I can't save him. All the money in the world, and I can't save my own son." Janet felt her carefully maintained professional distance crumble. Tomorrow's donation suddenly felt like both everything and not nearly enough. Friday morning brought chaos to the third floor. Lucas's condition had worsened overnight, and the doctors were pushing for immediate transfer to Boston. The window for treatment was closing rapidly. Janet arrived early, knowing her anonymous donation would be processed that morning. She'd barely slept, thinking about Richard's broken voice and Lucas's fever. The billing department had confirmed everything was ready. $40,000 would appear in the Castellano account within the hour. But as she walked past the nurse's station, she overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. The donation came through. The head nurse was telling Dr. Peterson, $40,000, anonymous cashier's check. "But there's a problem. The father is refusing to accept it." Janet's heart plummeted. "Refusing? He's convinced it's charity from the other wealthy families here, and his pride won't let him take what he calls pity money. He'd rather find another way than accept help from his social circle." Through the window of the family conference room, Janet could see Richard speaking intensely with Dr. Peterson and a social worker. His posture was rigid, defensive, the same stance she'd seen him take in the parking garage. "We've tried explaining that it's genuinely anonymous," Dr. Peterson was saying to the social worker. "But he's adamant, says he won't teach his son that success means accepting handouts." Janet felt panic rising in her chest. She'd liquidated her entire future for Lucas, and now pride was going to waste those 48 hours they didn't have. Without thinking clearly, Janet walked toward the conference room. Her hand hesitated on the door handle for just a moment before she knocked. "Excuse me," she said, stepping inside. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak with Mr. Castellano privately." Richard looked up, surprised to see the nurse from the parking garage incident. "This really isn't a good time. It's about your son's treatment fund," Janet said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The room fell silent. Dr. Peterson and the social worker exchanged glances. 5 minutes, Janet said to Richard. "Just 5 minutes." When they were alone, Janet took a deep breath. "The donation isn't from who you think it is. Look, I appreciate whatever social fund you nurses have set up, but it's from me," Janet said simply. Richard stared at her. "What, the $40,000? It's mine. I liquidated everything I own to pay for Lucas's treatment." The color drained from Richard's face. That's impossible. You drive that old car. You work as a nurse. I drove that old car because every extra dollar I had went into savings. I work as a nurse because I've spent 15 years watching children fight for their lives, and I've learned that some battles are worth everything you have. Richard's legs seemed to give out. He sank into a chair, staring at Janet as if seeing her for the first time. "Wednesday morning," he whispered, "when I said those things about your car. You were scared," Janet said gently. "We all say things we don't mean when we're watching someone we love suffer. You gave up everything." Richard's voice was barely audible. "For a stranger's child." After I treated you like ... If you've been moved by this incredible act of selflessness, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that restore faith in human kindness. Lucas, in A Stranger. Janet said softly, "He's my patient. And sometimes love means making impossible choices." The drive to Boston took for hours, but it felt like minutes to Janet as she sat in the passenger seat of Richard's luxury sedan. He'd insisted she come along, saying Lucas should meet the angel who'd saved his life. Behind them, an ambulance carried Lucas, stable enough for transport thanks to the immediate treatment the donation had allowed. "I keep trying to find words," Richard said as they pulled into the treatment center's parking lot. "Thank you feels like nothing compared to what you've done." Janet watched as they wheeled Lucas inside. The little boy was awake today, his eyes bright despite everything he'd endured. When he saw his father, he smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "Daddy." "The nurse lady looks nice," Lucas whispered when Janet approached his bed. "She's the nicest person in the whole world," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's the reason you're going to get better." Over the following weeks, Janet learned what generosity looked like from the other side. Richard had quietly paid off her mother's nursing home fees for the next 5 years. He'd also established a fund at the hospital for families facing similar crises, with Janet as the administrator. "I can't give you back your house or your savings," Richard had told her, "but I can make sure you never have to choose between your family's security and your calling to help others." Janet's new apartment was smaller than her old house, but the windows faced east toward the sunrise. She'd replaced her Honda with a reliable used car, nothing fancy, but it started every morning without fail. More importantly, she woke up each day knowing that Lucas was responding beautifully to his treatment in Boston. The day Lucas returned to visit the hospital, healthy, laughing, hair growing back in soft brown waves, Janet realized that some investments pay dividends that can't be measured in dollars. Richard had brought him to the pediatric ward to meet the other young patients, and watching Lucas hand out small gifts and words of encouragement, Janet saw the ripple effects of love in action. "Miss Janet," Lucas said, tugging on her scrubs, "Daddy says you're my hero, but I think you're everybody's hero." As the afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, Richard found Janet charting at the nurse's station. "I have something for you," he said, placing a small wrapped box beside her notes. Inside was a simple silver keychain with an inscription, "For the nurse who drives old cars to save young lives." "It's not about the car," Janet said, running her thumb over the engraving. "It never was. I know that now," Richard replied. "It's about having a heart big enough to fit everyone else's children inside it." 3 months later, Janet still worked the 3rd floor of the children's wing, still arrived each morning with the same quiet prayer for healing. But now she understood something new about love. It wasn't just about the giving. Sometimes it was about allowing others to give back, creating an endless circle of grace that lifted everyone it touched. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected kindness and redemption, please remember to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the good that exists in this world. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope.